Worry. Welcome everybody. It's my great pleasure to welcome Michael, who I've known in the climate action movement for, well, about 5 years or so. He's been extremely active in that time, but he's wanting to retire from retiring and do less, and so this may be one of the last projects that he has of researching the hydrogen subject, and it may be one of the last speaker meetings. So it's really fortunate that we have Michael, and that we're privileged that we should be the people he talks with. So welcome, Michael, and over to you.
Thank you, Zizi. And you'll have to tolerate what I'm afraid is a bit of a fading voice today, but we'll see how we make it through to the end. It's been a little difficult to judge at what sort of level to pitch this. I'll probably discover through the questions and answers towards the end of it, see how testing they are as to what level of knowledge you may have. It's quite difficult because there's really, over the breadth of this subject, nobody who can claim to be an expert. It's a very broad area, and you can only claim, I think, or individuals can only claim expertise over some aspect of it. But we'll see how we get on. Well, that's a promising start. That is my first slide. I hope everybody can hear that, see that clearly. Right. Hydrogen, its use and abuse. Before I launch into what it is that we've been doing, I'll do a bit of a backstory as to how we've come to pay attention to this issue. Some 5 years ago, the city of Derby commissioned a report from consultants on establishing a regional hydrogen strategy for Derby. And the consultants came back to say it doesn't make sense at a city level. It could only make sense at a regional level. And a very active local enterprise partnership, D2N2, who you may know of, picked up that baton and started running with it. And in the process, formed a relationship with Cadent, major gas distribution company in the region, to form what they called East Midlands Hydrogen. And you can see there they've been very active, gathering a sort of coalition around themselves of people who have an interest in the idea, the concept of a energy economy for the region. The website that East Midlands Hydrogen have gives a forecast for what it sees to be the prospects for hydrogen playing a significant part. And this is from that website. And if it's readable to you, on the left-hand side, they show a growing demand for hydrogen in 5-year intervals, and 2040 is as far as they go. And you can see it kind of rising exponentially up to what is effectively 10 terawatt hours of hydrogen energy being supplied to the region by 2040. And on the right-hand side, you'll see what they see as the makeup of that. Now, the colours they've chosen to make it easy to read, but the major point is the vast majority of the demand that they see is for aviation. And a relatively smaller part, but significant, is for power. Which is for grid balancing, which I shall come to explain later. Now, this did seem to be an enormous figure for a region. So a group of people very active within the Derbyshire and Derby climate coalitions, with an increasing connections with across the border into Nottinghamshire and groups over there, formed a EMCA climate coalition, and within that, an energy subgroup. And I'm pleased to see that Nigel, one of my fellow members in that subgroup, is with us this evening. He'll probably put me right where I go wrong. And it was actually Nigel who put a question to the EMCA as to what the provenance of these estimates were. And their answer was the cadence figures. And as soon as they become in a form publicly available, we will make them available to you. And sure enough, early this year, around February time, we were given a link to this report, which of course they could have supplied us months before because it dates back to August of last year. And what we realized when we received this report was that actually East Midlands hydrogen was only a relatively small part, no, not a small part, actually a quite large part, but a part of a larger area which extends from the Humber down into Leicestershire. And that effectively, as far as East Midlands combined climate authority was concerned, they would have only some influence over the direction that this entity takes. So the fact of having a co-chair to East Midlands Hydrogen probably doesn't mean a great deal at all. But you can see here on a map which forms the cover of this, a pipeline extending down through Nottinghamshire, and really not touching much of Derbyshire at all. It's if there was more detail on the map, what you would see is it really only extends into South Derbyshire as far as about the Rolls-Royce factory north of Derbyshire, and that's as far as it goes. But we were interested to see whether those estimates really made any kind of sense at all. And other work that had been done was to look at the emissions in the EMCA region and compare those with other areas. And what we found here was that the profile of our energy use in the authorities area is not quite that of UK as a whole. In fact, it's far more significant. We're far more significant in their industrial use. But what we know from an analysis of that is that much larger part of emissions which has come from industry are in fact from your valley, because it comes effectively from the cement works, the four cement works in and around the Buxton area, which contributes to something like 70% of Hope Valley, of High Peaks emissions, and that impact carries through to the region. So we know the context of the kind of energy demands that are likely to be need to be met. And there you see the EMCA distribution of energy. The industry is there on the top right, and it's almost all of High Peaks emissions, as you see on the left. So what we also saw in that vision document that became available to us was a rather different set of estimates. And here we see that compared to the 10 terawatt hours of estimated hydrogen demand towards 2050, which is 2050 we see on the right-hand side, we see Cadent estimating a very large proportion. Look at the lower ring of the diagram on this particular graphic, and you will see that something like 40% of the total energy demand of the region is seen to be met by hydrogen towards 2050. And the makeup of that is different. So now, the grid balancing is the dominant factor. The airport aviation is still a significant factor, but somehow the relationship is reversed, which does kind of, given that both of these in a sense are still what might be regarded as current numbers. The image on the left is still on Cadent's website, the East Midlands Hydrogen's website, and there has been no further information from Cadent as to suggest that the figures that they published in their vision report have changed. So it's very odd to see these. We know they come from different sources. We know that the figures on the left, they claim to be them going around the region asking people what sort of hydrogen they felt that they would need. Figures on the left come from modelling what they think the demand might be. But we can compare these to figures that we can see in two other reports. The figure on the image on the left is the Committee on Climate Change report to government on the 7th carbon budget, which is the path of emissions that we have to stay within if we stand any hope of reaching net zero by 2050. And on the right-hand side, a report by the National Energy Systems Operator, responsible for ensuring that the system can deliver what's needed, which publishes a set of scenarios. And what we see here is that the CCC think that the hydrogen should only represent about 10% of the UK energy economy by 2050. The NESOs look at three scenarios, one with a focus particularly on hydrogen. Should that be a sensible way to go? In contrast to one which focuses on electrification. And that suggests a somewhat higher percentage of the economy might be met by hydrogen. But what is striking is that CCC see a demand for 60 terawatt hours for the entire UK. And just to remind you, it seems that Cadent see a load of something like 30 terawatt hours, half the UK's energy demand, just in the one region. So we can only regard this as an overreaching attempt to essentially keep the gas industry going, or gas industry transformed into an industry which is supplying hydrogen. Now, there's a lot of what is called hype in this regard, because in truth, hydrogen should only be sensibly used in certain areas where there really are no alternatives. Hydrogen, of course, is already made, and it has important uses. It's used in the making of nitrogen-based fertilizers. It's used in refining petroleum in the oil industry, and it also has it obviously has chemical uses as well. As a chemical feedstock. It's not used in any significant degree for the provision of energy. So this needs to be looked at critically. And somebody who has looked at it very critically is Michael Liebrich, who has what has now become a classic representation of how hydrogen should and should not be used. And at the top of this ladder, as he calls it, there is a line in which really there is no alternative. It's a continuation of how hydrogen is presently used, and where there is no sensible alternative. At the bottom of the diagram, and indeed all of the areas of the diagram which are marked as yellow should really be the domain of electricity in a future in which renewable energy plays a major part in the energy economy, the UK's energy economy. And this hype follows what is deemed to be a classic cycle where there are unrealistic expectations which reach a point where effectively it no longer can be maintained as credible. And then there's a sort of collapse. And then as things are looked at more critically, some resolution sees a sensible level of expectation for that. And I would suggest in terms of the shape of this particular curve, the resulting plateau is probably at a rather lower level than we see it in this diagram. And as time has gone on, there have been a number of enterprises that have tried to develop profitable enterprises in this area, and many of them have fallen by the wayside. So hype, as is rather amusingly represented here in this Hydrogen Power Expo diagram, is joined by another phrase which is called opium, other people's money, where these industries seem to have effectively, in many instances, been set up in order as a cash cow, really, to enjoy the benefits of government subsidies. You can see there's a degree of cynicism in my voice here. So, hydrogen, what is it, and how do we get some? Well, hydrogen is a odorless, clear gas which burns with a flame which is almost invisible. In fact, to all effects and purposes in daylight is invisible. This particular graphic shows on the left-hand side the burning of a natural gas flame, and then progressively with an admix of 25%, of the 50% and 75%, and ultimately 100% hydrogen. You can see that becomes more and more invisible. So its particular characteristics is it's the most abundant element in the atmosphere, in the universe. The universe, I mean, is it's what first happened after the Big Bang. It's what stars are formed of. But when you come to the level of our planet, it is not at all abundant. It represents only 1/2 a part per million of our atmosphere. That's decimal point followed by 4 zeros and a 5% of our atmosphere as a free gas. But of course, it's a superabundant in the fact that it is a component part of water, H2O, and of course is also a very significant part of the hydrocarbons, literally hydrocarbons, methane, CH4, and etc. But it's a tiny molecule, tiny atom, which means it will leak out of anywhere given the opportunity. And in its leaking, it'll even find its way into the lattices of steel and cause that steel to embrittle. It has a very low ignition point. It has a very rapid flame front. Combine those two, you have something which is extremely explosive. It has very high energy density in terms of energy per mass, but given that it's such a light gas, when you look at it in terms of energy density per volume, it is actually very low energy density. It also burns hotter than natural gas. It burns at a flame temperature of around about 1,200 degrees centigrade, as opposed to about 1,000 degrees centigrade for a natural gas flame. So that's its characteristic as a gas. As to how we get some, there are two principal ways. It can be derived from natural gas. In other words, we can strip the hydrogen out of the methane molecule by a process called SMR. I think that's called steam something. Damn it, I've lost the term. Never mind. SMR. So that takes liquid natural gas in, and it strips the carbon out, so it emits carbon dioxide. So effectively, the process is a great polluter in terms of global heat gases, and this is only an acceptable way of getting large quantities of gas if we use carbon capture and storage as part of that process. If you don't have carbon capture and storage associated with it, it's called black hydrogen or grey hydrogen. Strip store away the carbon dioxide, and it becomes what's termed blue hydrogen. Downside, two downsides. One is the amount for one volume of methane, of hydrogen, of a particular energy content, you would need 3.3 times, over three times as much methane to start with. That's the penalty you get for stripping the carbon out of it. Which means that for an energy demand that is currently met by natural gas, which we import largely now, because our North Sea stocks are running down rapidly, we'd have to import 3 times as much liquid natural gas. So in terms of energy security, this is not a great deal. So that comes to the UK from the United States or the Gulf states, principal suppliers, and it gets stripped out by SMR plant, of which this is an illustration. Right. The other principal form is by electrolysis of water. effectively taking a H2O and stripping the oxygen away from that by a process of electrolysis, which requires electricity. Ideally, that electricity should be from renewable energy, and if it is, it's termed green hydrogen. And an electrolyzer is a rather large piece of industrial equipment, of which this is an example. So, having been disturbed at what we had seen, the self-titled EMCA Climate Coalition Energy Subgroup have made a submission to the EMCA authority on hydrogen in the energy economy of the East Midlands. And that is a report which looks at 5 sectors of use. It also has an executive summary section, but it has these 5 principal parts: aviation, heavy-duty vehicles, building heating, industry, and grid balancing. So starting with hydrogen and aviation, because of its low volumetric energy density, the only way you can use it in aviation is if you actually liquefy it, which means not only are you taking a lot of energy to form it into hydrogen by the process of electrolysis in the first instance, you have even more energy taken up by liquefying it. But even liquefied, as a liquefied gas, it only has something like 1/3 of the energy density of kerosene, which is what the principal form of fuel used by aviation now. And that is a problem. The power is in this instance is through a fuel cell to provide the motive power, the propulsive power for a propeller-driven aircraft. And you see this one as an experimental aircraft based on a small feeder-like aircraft. And it's still fairly early stages in the development of this. I don't know that this particular aircraft is flown very far from its home airfield yet. So there's some way to go. But as soon as we start thinking about aviation in the form that matters, civil aviation, then we have a very different problem, because that low energy density means in order to be able to place enough of it on the aircraft, we'd have to completely redesign the airframe. It is no longer a tube with wings sprouting out the side. Effectively, the entire airframe has to be capable of generating lift in order to be able to provide sufficient volume within it, while still being capable of lifting itself off the ground to be able to perform its function. And we're not going to see aircraft of this type until towards 2050. Airbus has just put back its own efforts to develop an aircraft which is capable of flying on hydrogen. But not only that, if we take the amount of kerosene that's currently used in aviation, and this is neglecting any growth that the industry is aiming to achieve, in order to be able to provide the equivalent amount of energy in liquid hydrogen, we would need to divert electricity supply equivalent to about anywhere between 70 and 85% of our entire current electrical generating capacity in the UK. So this doesn't look like a very sustainable way of going about it. The alternatives, and we're already in the early stages of this, is to use synthetic aviation fuels, of which hydrogen can be a component part, but effectively you're creating a hydrocarbon. You're actually having to, depending on which form of synthetic aviation fuel you're going for, but one form would actually require taking direct air capture of carbon out of the air in order to combine that carbon with the hydrogen to create a hydrocarbon. There's also other, and indeed, there's also a requirement. I think currently at the moment, airlines operating out of the UK are currently required, as is the case in most of Europe, to include 10% of a synthetic aviation fuel in their fuel, i.e. 90% kerosene, 10% synthetic fuel. And that percentage is progressively to increase over the years. I think they were stopping short to reflect on it once they've reached about 40%, way off in the maybe 2040s. Third possibility is to use a biofuel. And globally, that is seen to be probably the solution, but it's problematical for the UK and much of Western Europe because we just do not have enough area that we can set aside so that a biofuel will actually be competing with other land use. Now, this matters to the East Midlands, although strictly East Midlands is just outside of the authority's area. The East Midlands Airport and its associated Freeport are very important components just outside. And therefore, the impact of what this all might mean for aviation, which you remember was that major part of the demand in East Midlands diagram, greater than 50% of their total energy market as they saw, is quite clearly not credible. And not only is it just too damn energy expensive, but also there's a kind of double whammy because East Midlands Airport relies principally on the low-cost aviation sector, the leisure travel aviation sector, which is extremely price sensitive. Price elasticity is such that if, for example, fuel cost resulted in an increase in the cost of a ticket price by 20%, as it might well do, the evidence is that a 20% increase in ticket price would result in a 20% reduction in people buying those tickets. And that, frankly, would begin a kind of downward spiral in the economics of aviation in the region. Moving on, hydrogen and heavy-duty road vehicles. That might seem a little odd, but I just opened the subject up by showing you a couple of cars. We didn't look at cars because essentially the matter is settled. As far as the car is concerned, hydrogen has lost out. Figures are these figures are principally taken from China because in China, essentially, the number of battery-driven hydrogen vehicles in China outnumbers cars, battery or hydrogen cars elsewhere in the world. And the ratio of battery vehicles to hydrogen vehicles in China is 750 to 1. This is a classic kind of rerun of the VHS Betamax situation. Effectively, the interest in hydrogen has come in too little and too late. And the market is not interested in it, frankly, because they cost more to their energy cost is much higher. They cost more to manufacture because they're mechanically more complicated. And their refueling requires an infrastructure that will find it investment very difficult. They will not have anything like the convenience of the ability to be able to charge at home. You're not going to have a hydrogen dispenser on your patio as you can with electricity with the BEV. So there was no need really to focus upon this. But placing it in personal terms, our expectations of personal transport, of course, have changed very much over the year, and we do need to think again about it. And the image on the left is me, at the age of 2, in what passed for our family transport back in the day, 1948, which was a bicycle and tandem. Outside the house that we lived in Pimlico in central London, looking still a bit ragged after the immediate post-war period. The image on the right is as it is now, but it also carries the message that even in cities we choose to be car dependent, and we really do need to think very seriously, despite the fact that we will have the opportunity with battery-driven vehicles for motoring, which is less expensive than using petrol or diesel. We still need to think very carefully about whether that is a sustainable lifestyle in a future energy economy. So, looking at heavy duty vehicles, we looked at buses, coaches, intercity coaches, and also heavy goods vehicles, and also recyclable vehicles. And again, looking at the statistics in China, in which from where many of these vehicles will be coming, but in their own market, the ratio of battery vehicles, of heavy-duty vehicle, battery-driven heavy-duty vehicles to hydrogen is 35-1 now. It's really only at a very long distance, very long range that hydrogen currently has a niche, but that niche is getting smaller and smaller as battery technology develops. So, and again, it comes to the point where in order to develop the infrastructure, the charging infrastructure that will be needed, it'll be very much more difficult to find investors to do what is represented only by an imaginative graphic, because they don't exist here in the UK, for hydrogen distribution. Oh no, there is one hydrogen distribution point hub, I think on the M4 in the UK, compared to the ability of heavy goods vehicles to be able to find an electrical charge. If you go on to hydrogen and building heating, here, the hopes of the gas industry is that, or was, that they would be able to replace natural gas supply to the home to be burnt in gas boilers by hydrogen boilers. So that would be a very straightforward transfer, because it wouldn't require much other than changing the boiler. And indeed, boilers that are currently made are being designed specifically to allow for ready conversion, should that conversion take place. But there's very little enthusiasm. 2 efforts at running trials of hydrogen boilers have failed in the UK due to resistance from the local community to be part of any such trial. And a decision is expected, supposed to be by the end of this year, but it's getting quite close to the end of the year, on whether that market should develop. The alternative, of course, is for heat pumps. And again, using a personal experience, 2 months ago, I commissioned a heat pump at my own house. You see it on the external unit, the heat pump itself, outside on the patio. And just beside me here, in the room that I'm delivering this lecture from, are the internal components of it, which at first I thought I should enclose, but I was so delighted by its appearance, I thought I'll have it all on display for open days so that people can come and look, see what's been done. But I particularly wanted to show the image on the left alongside a car, my current car, which will very soon, within the next 2 months or so, I hope, be replaced by a battery vehicle. Because this is where the battery vehicle will be charged. But that charger point will allow 2-way flow of electricity to charge the vehicle, and then to use the vehicle the battery in the vehicle to actually support the home when electricity is expensive. And electricity is expensive is when the grid is under stress and has to supplement its renewable energy by more and more fossil fuel energy, and also to be able to iron out the peaks such that the renewable energy can be used more effectively. So this notion of vehicle to home or vehicle to grid is going to be part of the strategy that I will be adopting. And that the CCC has recognised will be a very significant part in the future UK energy economy. And to kind of rub the point in, this is a graphic to which I owe an acknowledgement to David Seaborn, who's professor at Cambridge, who's been working with us, which illustrates the comparison between using electricity through an electrolyzer to produce green energy as a replacement to natural gas to burn in a boiler in a building, which represents the top part of this diagram, and in the bottom part of the diagram, the use of that same use for the same amount of heat being delivered, how much less electricity has to be found in order to provide that heat by use of a heat pump. The ratio here, 6:1, translated in David's terms by the number of or the amount of renewable energy that needs to be would need to be located in the North Sea or wherever, compared to the heat pump route. Now, not only does this matter in terms of the amount of national investment in energy infrastructure, it also matters at the level of the household, because there is no way in which that gas can be sold at less than the price of the electricity that was used to generate it. And if that electricity was used directly into that, directly in the form of the heat pump, that difference will emerge as the social cost of fuel poverty. Now, it's not only at the domestic scale. We tend to see the argument in domestic scale, but that little house, the right-hand side of that diagram, is for every kind of building. So what Cadence and their like would wish to see is the replacement of all boilers, current boilers, by just changing them over, converting to natural gas. Whereas the heat pump is its sensible alternative. And this is not new technology. I installed my first heat pump in a building back in the mid-70s. And at the end of the 70s, I was engaged in a study on hospitals. And if we take hospitals as a complex building type, in which you might envisage that there could possibly be a need for hydrogen, the study that we did looked very carefully at all aspects of the way a hospital would use energy. And forgive the complexity of this diagram. In fact, it's quite simple. The hospital is represented on the right. On the left are the components of an energy system which would feed it. And at the heart of it is a heat pump. And that is looking at the needs for energy in the hospital at the temperature at which that energy is needed. And there is no part of this complex building which needs heat at a temperature that could not be satisfied by a heat pump. And not only was that a research project, but proof of concept was in a hospital which was designed by the design team. I provided the concept for it, which was built on the Isle of Wight, and provided that proof of concept. Hydrogen in industry. How are we doing for time, by the way? It's easy.
We're nearly 8:20, so you've been talking. Oh, actually, well over the half hour. Sorry, I forgot to tell you at the half hour point.
Okay.
Would you be able to wind up in the next
Yes,
5 or
yes.
10 minutes? Because
Yes, I
then
can.
it'd be half
I
an hour
can.
for
Yes, I
questions.
can.
Actually, no. Sorry, I'm completely wrong. You've been going for well over that. We were due to finish by. No. Yes, finish in the next 10 minutes. We'll have half an hour for questions.
Okay, right. In industry, there are industries which quite clearly need high temperature heat. We need, and some of these are new needs. Steel, for example, has typically needed in order to reduce from ore coal or coking. Coke to provide the carbon steel. Most of our steel actually comes from electrodes from recycling steel. But but to replace the coal and fossil fuels we need that we have used in steel making, hydrogen will have to play its part there for that part of the steel making market which is using ore. Other areas which also require effectively not just the temperature but also the flame is in glass making, and brick making is probably also of a similar nature. So we acknowledge that there will be a demand for these. And the last sector we looked at was hydrogen and grid balancing. And here, the realization is with renewables that they are variable. There are times in which they are providing a surplus of energy, and other times in which they are in deficit. And in order to even that out, we need some form of storage. And batteries are coming along. Otherwise, I wouldn't be committing to the notion of having one here in the form of a battery with 4 wheels and a steering wheel. But there's a limit to the duration in which a battery can store energy. And we need alternatives. And one such investigation is the idea of storing it away in caverns. So you produce electricity from your renewables, you compress it, you pump it into a cavern, you take it out, you run it through a turbine to generate electricity to use at times when there's a deficit. The amount of electricity you get out of this process is only about 20% of what you put in. So in terms of its runaround efficiency, it's a disaster compared to the kind of 80 or 90%. Well, 90% you'll get back from a battery. But nevertheless, when needs must, the devil will drive. But this is why the CCC see only 10% of the UK energy market being net by hydrogen, in that it sees that these periods of time where this backup is going to be needed are in fact fairly limited, and for much of it can be dealt with by other more conventional batteries, particularly the way that battery technology itself is moving. Batteries don't all have to have extremely high energy densities to be used in mobile situations. If they're static, then the greater weight of a lower energy density is quite acceptable. And there are then things like iron flow batteries that can do the job. In the East Midlands, we don't have the salt caverns that would be ideal for this sort of purpose. So there has been exploration of using what are effectively depleted oil wells or gas wells. But the problem here is that they are subject to microbiological problems, which the environment of the gas cushion in the storage allows the development of microbes, which effectively pollute whatever. And you have to deal with that before you can use the resulting hydrogen in any kind of chemical fashion. Probably doesn't matter too much if you're only using it for power. So this again is not a done deal as far as the East Midlands is concerned. So that's it. We've looked very carefully at, in the way that Michael Liebrecht has looked at where hydrogen should and should not be used. And we've made our recommendations to EMCA on that basis. Only use it where electrification is not a possibility. Only use it when the input energy is genuinely low carbon. Avoid diverting that renewable energy from its possible direct use, because if you do divert it, you're actually going to slow down decarbonisation in the UK. And then plan for when you do have these very particular needs in industry, put the industry together in a cluster so that your infrastructure is reasonable. And finally, I should acknowledge that this is not, although this is a work of the group of people that form this coalition subgroup, we were very ably helped by a panel of more expert people, and we're very grateful for that contribution they made. And as my voice fails almost altogether, it is time for questions and answers.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. I'm sorry I completely got so interested in what you were saying that I lost the time and didn't remind you at the half-hour point. But it shows, I certainly was very interested. What I'd like people to do is put their hand up using at the bottom of the screen there's a react icon which is a heart shape. And if you click on that, second from bottom is a broad line called raise hand. And so if you click on the raise hand, then I will be able to call people, and I'll ask you to ask your question and let Michael answer. So, do we have any questions? Claire. Would you like to unmute and then ask your question? Not hearing you yet, Claire. Oh, yes, you don't appear to be muted. Well, you are now, but you weren't when you were trying to speak. Well, maybe this isn't going to work as well as I'd hoped. Perhaps if you put your question in the chat, and I'll try Richard.
Right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. I was just jumping on the last point about storage in caverns. The company called Store Electric that I was looking at, they use CAES, compressed air energy. And what they were doing was putting compressed air in caverns rather than hydrogen. Is that something you've heard of and sounds feasible?
The energy density is less. It doesn't follow that. I suppose caverns are a sensible place to put it because they are capable of supporting quite a lot of pressure, and pressure is what matters.
Mm.
I think, sadly, like so many other areas, and I think of very particularly tidal stream energy, not enough money is being put into it to be able to really recognise whether it does have that potential.
Yeah, I think funding is a big part. Initially, they had a lot of money from Shell to get into that sort of thing, tie-ups with universities, and then they've gone rather quiet of late. So I think they're probably looking at hydrogen rather than just storing, compressing air. So, sure you're right there.
Thank you. Now, Claire's typed in her question, so I'll take it before John's. She's saying, you know the slide you had showing the comparative efficiency of heat pumps for domestic heating? It included several percentages, and can you explain what these referred to?
All right, okay. Now,
can you bring that up quite easily?
Oh, I see. You want me to go back?
Well, it might be helpful to look at the slide while you're explaining what the percentages are.
We will try. We'll see. Good Lord. It looks like it happened. All right. How far back do I have to go here to satisfy people?
I think.
Are you fairly comfortable with the concept of what a heat pump is?
I think she put her hand up there.
Yes.
So what I think is, look, you've got from electricity 26 gigawatts, transmission 90% for the heat pump, and then you've got heat from the environment 300%. Whereas up the top you've got the yellow and then 75%, and then you've got some green bit, and then you've got some 90 and 80 percentages,
right,
and then boilers 90 and so on. So it's those percentages I think that need.
Yes.
Why are they not just going through at 100%?
Well, first of all, conversion of electricity into green hydrogen through the use of those electrolyzers. The electrolyzer has about a 75% efficiency. So there you are. There's your first loss. Then you have to compress it.
Hang on.
And
You're saying you've got the 95% for the conversion and the 75. Do those get added together? So you lose 80, you're only getting 70%.
yes, something of
Okay.
that order. Yep. So effectively, you've already lost 30.
30% in total.
Yep. Before you've even got to your boiler.
Yep.
Your
Okay.
boiler is then would operate quite reasonably. A modern boiler should operate at around 90% efficiency. So if you work all of those losses back, most of and the only losses which is common. No, not even that's common, because the losses in transmission in this low density hydrogen to get it compressed and pass it through pipes means that even the transmission losses are greater than the losses are associated with electricity. So these losses are effectively compounded back all the way. But of course, the greatest part of all of that, not losses, more opportunity, is that the heat pump is going to take its energy and use it to collect heat from the surroundings, from air, from water, usually air, to effectively multiply its effect.
So in the bottom one, generating the electricity, you lose 10% and get 90%. But then you take that 90% and from the air, from the heat from the environment, you top that up to 300%. Is that correct?
Yes, effectively.
Okay. So can you put your hand up if that's, thumb up if that's good? Okay, good. Thank you, Claire. If you unshare your screen and I'll take the next person, which I think was John Beardmore. Would you like to ask your question next, John?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing we didn't touch on earlier was that hydrogen is an indirect greenhouse gas. I think it's got a GWP of a bit over 11, so 11 times worse than carbon dioxide or thereabouts.
Can you unshare your screen, Michael?
If I can figure out how to do that, hang on.
Okay, just a second, John. Sorry, I should have done one thing at a time.
What did I do to do it last time? Here we go.
Good?
Yeah.
Okay, start again, John.
Yeah, hydrogen is an indirect greenhouse gas with a global warming potential of about 11. It's also a very small molecule and prone to leak. So presumably the more hydrogen activity we have in the economy, the more damage we're going to do to the climate that way. Is there any sort of figures that you're aware of, Michael, to do with how much damage we're doing to climate with leaks already and how much it might go up in future?
I'm sorry that breaking up there again, John. Could you just ask the question again?
Yeah, hydrogen is an indirect greenhouse gas. I think
yes.
global warming potential is about 11. Yeah, and it's a small molecule prone to leak. Can we assess the sort of current impact at all of hydrogen leaks on climate? And with the various scenarios, has anybody done any work to assess how much that might increase in future?
I'm sure they have. I'm not aware of it, frankly, John.
Okay.
Interesting question, John, even if we don't know the answer. Thank you. I wasn't aware that hydrogen was a direct greenhouse gas and that therefore...
It's not, it's an indirect one. So hydrogen itself doesn't trap heat in the atmosphere, but it messes with the chemistry so that things like methane survive longer in the atmosphere.
Oh, okay, thank you. And so, therefore, the more you use, the more it's going to have this indirect effect. Okay,
unless you can completely stop it leaking, which seems a bit unlikely.
indeed.
What
Tim,
was yeah,
okay, do you want
it's
to?
not directly related to that, but given it's reminded me of something else, and this something else is worth mentioning, I shall mention it now, and that is um, hydrogen is an aviation fuel. It burns hotter than in kerosene. It may only leave water vapor in the sky, but it's leaving water vapor in the sky where it's even more damaging than elsewhere. Contrails contribute something like 70% of the the contrail is less damaging than the carbon dioxide that results, but it's something like 70% of the damage that the carbon dioxide causes. It's not trivial.
The other thing is presumably you get more NOx emissions with hydrogen.
Yes. Yeah. If burnt rather than used in a fuel cell. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for adding that fact. Tim, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. Unless I missed it, you didn't say anything about sources of hydrogen from within the Earth itself.
Mm.
And it is my understanding that certainly in some parts of the world, there is a lot of hydrogen available, albeit well under ground surface. Any comments, please?
Yes. There's a location in Africa, I can't remember exactly where it is, where it caused a great surprise to the local community as to why these, if they were smoking in the air, they were there were explosions. And they were able actually to harness this at some point and use it positively. The extent to which this is available, this geological hydrogen, is not really known. And we're certainly not at the point yet where we can embody it in any sensible planning.
Okay.
I'll just check with Simon. Have there been any other questions put in the chat?
There's one from Emma Simpson asking about how much energy does it take to use to electrolysis, basically, as compared to produce green hydrogen relative to grey, black, blue hydrogen.
Sorry, is that? I didn't catch that, Simon.
Right. Well, perhaps is Emma there? Would you like to ask the question?
Yes, I'm here. I have very little knowledge about hydrogen, so it probably is a very naive question. But you mentioned earlier on in the presentation about the electrolysis element to produce the green hydrogen. And how much electricity does that use versus the grey black hydrogen?
It's difficult to make that comparison because it's incommensurable. There are different forms of energy that's being employed. The one in the blue hydrogen that would be grey if it weren't for the carbon capture. The energy comes in the form of natural gas, whereas in the case of green hydrogen, it comes in the form of electricity from renewables. So they're different forms of energy. So how one reduces this to a common comparator, it's difficult.
I think, though, that was fairly early on in your presentation. So as we went through, I I wouldn't say I understood more, but I realised how it's not simple, um, and slightly disappointing, really, from my very naive and uninformed background. I mean, this has been really interesting. I sort of had in my head that hydrogen was the answer to a lot of things, but actually it doesn't appear to be the case. So I've really got a lot out of this presentation so far. But one other question I had, when it talked about the sort of trials that didn't go anywhere because there was reluctance from the community to participate. Were those communities urban or rural? Do you know?
One was in the rural peninsula. It was, I would say they were somewhere in between. They were suburban.
Okay. Yep, thank you.
But you required a fair, for a trial of this sort, you need a reasonable density of population, because what they would have to do is to parallel up the gas mains. You couldn't just isolate a section of the gas main to start passing hydrogen through it. And indeed, the materials used in those gas mains would be unsuitable for passing gas into it. But the mention of that is something else which I didn't include, but which should have been included, and that is the idea of using partial hydrogen. In other words, I've lost the term. My brain is a bit muddled at the moment here. But you can inject up to 20% hydrogen into a gas main which is carrying natural gas, without there becoming a materials problem or flame control problem in the boiler. That's the limit you can go to, and that is being considered. We already inject biomethane in our gas mains, so anything which allows some reduction of the fossil is seen to be worthwhile. But you have to be realistic, because of the lower volumetric heat content density of hydrogen compared to natural gas. A 20% injection only results in a 7% reduction of emissions that result from the combustion. So in terms of the amount of money...
Why do you get such a poor conversion?
Because you're lowering the calorific value of the mix.
But hydrogen burns hotter, so why does the
calorific... That's the temperature at which it burns. It's not the amount of heat content.
Oh, okay. Yep. Okay, thanks. Thanks for clarifying that. And I see in the chat, it's somebody's explained that the main reason that people objected to the hydrogen villages was fear of gas explosions. And
yes.
With hydrogen being such a leaky fuel, you can see why that could be the case.
Yes. There were studies done. The Health and Safety Executive did pass gave permission on the basis that studies that had been done had shown that there was the risk of fatalities were no greater than the natural gas. Now, the comparative was not with electricity, which was quite clearly an alternative, the alternative you were to heat pumps, but the comparison was with natural gas. So it's just a question of really, how do you choose to die? Is it an explosion or being poisoned?
And some of the natural gas are people deliberately committing suicide rather than an accident. Anyway, let's leave that. As nobody else has their hand up, I'll ask a question. When you were going through the aircraft, you talked about needing to liquefy the hydrogen and explaining that that wasn't particularly a good idea because it would use so much of the whole of the electricity generated. And then you had other possibilities, synthetic fuel, and that didn't seem particularly good idea either, and biofuels, which would need a huge amount of land, and it didn't really have a clear what would you recommend as the fuel for aircraft. And my second part of that question is, you said that this is significant from East Midlands because the leisure aviation sector is so price sensitive, it would reduce in less aviation. But wouldn't that be a good thing? I thought if you look at the Centre for Alternative Technology projections for net zero, there's a huge reduction in aviation, and encouraging people to do other things and go flying off here, then everywhere for leisure is surely a good idea. So 2 questions there.
Well, I'm biased here. And I'm a pilot, or was a pilot. My leisure activity was flying. It was flying in a glider, admittedly. But I have been an aviation enthusiast all my life. So it came at a pretty tough decision that I made when in 2017, flying back from Finland, where I'd been taking part in an aerobatic competition, I decided this was going to be my last commercial flight. I haven't flown in a commercial airliner since, and indeed, for other reasons, my flying career is over as well. I'm past it now. But you can see that this is an issue which I take no comfort in. But effectively, the holiday that you take each year in some far-off warm climate is a massive part of your carbon footprint. So it's a dilemma.
Which of the alternatives were you saying? Because they all seem to have drawbacks. Hydrogen and the other possibilities. Which of the 3 were you saying?
It might be that the solution has to be, and this again will be adding to the cost, and that is recognizing that globally there's enough growing potential for a biofuel. We will have to import. We'll have to bring it in on tankers.
Okay, thank you. I'd rather use the whole of the world's land for other things personally, and encourage everybody to give up flying. But I guess we'll agree to differ on that. Simon has a question.
Really just a comment on the geological deposits of hydrogen. It's fine if your industry that needs the hydrogen is adjacent to the gas source. Otherwise, you've then got to transport the hydrogen somehow. And we've talked about how it's dangerous and energy intensive to liquefy it and transport it. There are liquids and solids which are being experimented with to bind hydrogen, but they are very much in the early stages. And I don't think this is really going to be a solution, even if we do find large geological deposits. Would you agree with that, Michael?
Yes. As to the transport of hydrogen by tanker, there are huge losses associated with it in order to keep it liquefied at sea for any period of time. So much so that the thinking is that the only practical way of doing it is to convert the hydrogen to effectively a hydrogen carrier. For example,
Ammonia.
ammonia. I wouldn't sit easy on any ship that was carrying ammonia, or any port that was handling it. But again, there's it's all in a similar manner to that poor runaround efficiency you get from trying to store hydrogen in caverns. If you're using energy to get it into ammonia at one end of it and cracking the ammonia at the other end, I mean, there's a degree of nonsense, it seems, in all of this. But if we can keep things at a reasonable scale, I think it's the top and bottom of this is the hype that has been hydrogen, the notion that we should be seeking opportunities to use the stuff, rather than recognizing that far more valuable is the electricity that you would be using for that to decarbonise much more effectively, directly, than using hydrogen as an energy carrier. Limit the use of hydrogen to where it is, where its particular properties are unique to its application.
We'll read out a few of the chats in case you've got a comment on them. John Beardball agrees that we need our wild spaces and space for agriculture and to maintain food supply as climate change changes where you can grow food. And Chris says that the government has a policy of not limiting aviation growth, that's official policy. So at the moment, almost all sustainable aviation fuel now used in Europe is waste vegetable oil that's imported from the global south. There's not enough in Europe.
Yep.
But
the entire notion, the entire notion of a sustainable aviation fuel at present just looks like an oxymoron.
And he goes on to say there are already reports about this so-called waste vegetable oil, which used to be used for animal feed, is now being sold to Europe to feed cars with biofuels and flights and so on. So less flights, Chris reckons, is the only answer. Any other questions that people have? Well, if there isn't, I thought it's interesting that China had put so much energy into looking at hydrogen. The fact that even as many as 1 in 7 cars are hydrogen. Didn't you say 1 in 7 cars?
No, one in 750.
I got that figure wrong. Okay, so yes, that changes the figure hugely. But the fact that they've got any, I'm surprised they didn't. Why did they bother even going that much?
It has to be said that ratio has been growing progressively. So it's not as if really there is much hope for hydrogen to continue very much further. It's been an example where opium has been employed very significantly.
I don't quite see the connection with opium, but let's go on.
There's no fortunate connection between opium and China, admittedly, but other people's money. It's really a result of the Chinese government trying to get things moving along.
Oh, I see. Let's get a question from Tim. You'll need
Right.
to yes.
I have. Thank you. It was reported a while back that JCB were developing hydrogen-powered internal combustion engines
Yes.
for their equipment.
Yep. Yep.
How is that getting on? How is it getting on?
Well, they've received a lot of money.
Okay. Are they making it work?
Yes. I mean, it's not. There's not a great deal of difficulty in causing an internal combustion engine to burn hydrogen.
Oh no.
But indeed, no, they've taken a different route. But it's only intended to be a niche operation, which is off grid, off road, somewhere where the infrastructure can't possibly exist. So you can probably bring it in the form of a cylinder.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a small niche operation. There's a niche operation in the East Midlands, just starting. Another example of opium, I'm afraid. There's been 2 rounds of government funding called HAR, hydrogen allocation rounds, that have sought proposals for hydrogen applications, and there were 20 on the first round, HAR1. I think there were 11 successful bids, only of which 3 of them are actually progressing at the moment. One of them is at High Marham, former power station, which is Geopura, associated with J.G. Pears, an animal feed specialist. And the concept here is that green hydrogen will be produced by how does this path work? Well, obviously the intention is to use renewable energy, obviously to generate electricity to derive this. But the result will be bottled hydrogen, which will be used in connection with fuel cell to generate electricity for off-grid uses, for example, like remote film locations or events. It's a pretty small deal, it has to be said, but nevertheless, there were so few decent proposals that came forward that this was favoured.
Okay.
Gosh, the time whizzes by. It's just come up to 9 o'clock, or at least 1 minute to. So that neatly, there's nobody left with their hand up, so that neatly winds us up. So it's just my pleasure to thank you for coming and giving us a talk and all those lovely slides. And the slides and the recording will be made available in a few days, or maybe a week or so, in due course. And we're also experimenting with getting AI to produce summaries. We'll see whether they're any good or not. It's partly just playing with the technology to see what it can do, but if they're worth circulating, we may circulate them as well. In the meantime, thank you all for coming. Thank you very much, Michael, for speaking to us. It's been a lovely evening.